everyone. Welcome back to our Qineticare webinar series, Embracing Change. We're going to switch gears a little bit from last week, where we had Peter Vogel talking about family enterprise, healthy family enterprise, and we're joined again with Henry Chong, who we had the honor and privilege of having a dialogue with on anti-fragility and how that is impacting family businesses. So today, we're going to talk about digitization and how it's there to improve our well-being. We hear and spend a lot of time on the negativities, but today we're going to talk about the positive side. And so Henry, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's dinner time, so hopefully after we enjoy this time together, you can have a late meal. Sorry about that.
Thanks for having me, as always.
All right, so tell me, let's begin. Digitization, first, what are the realms we're talking about? Because, there's technologies, there's digitization. Let's kind of differentiate the two or put them in a specific place, and then start talking about the different elements of well-being and how it's actually helping us. So welcome, Henry.
Thank you. Well, I guess to me, I think of digitization and more broadly of this term of technology as just to me, technology is an improved way of doing something. It's a new, novel, unique way of doing something. Digitization, I guess, when most people use that term, they have in mind computers, the internet. That's what they mean by digital. And I think that's a useful distinction to draw out, because a lot of the negatives that I hear about digitization, so we were talking just before we started this call, for example, where people always bemoan the fact that, oh, there is so much more information that is accessible in today's world. There is so much more media, right? It's immediate because of social media. It's viral. It hits you whether you like it or not. And that is distracting us, and that is bad for us. And I always find that interesting, because if you look back to, let's say, the 1920s, there are a lot of stories about people who said, look, you now have daily newspapers in America. Dailies, the first start of every morning having a newspaper because of advances in printing and distribution, where before people would buy a newspaper maybe once a week, and suddenly people were reading the newspaper every morning. And they said, this is the end of civilization as we know it. Information is too available, it's too quick, it's viral. Something happens in New York and the whole country knows about it, and it's a disaster. I have this picture that I guess I can't share now, that I always like to share, which is of people sitting in an old subway carriage reading the newspaper, many decades ago. And then today, people sitting in that same New York subway carriage, but looking down on their phones. And they look exactly the same, except instead of holding a newspaper, they're playing with an iPhone. And I find that fascinating.
We'll share that with the recording.
Yeah, the caption is like, don't tell me technology is changing us, right? It always looks the same. The pace of things, I think, changes in today's world because it is becoming more interconnected. And the pace of change is so fast that it feels like a categorical difference. But I think if you zoom out, in a long enough period, you realize it's actually all the same trend line, right? Information has always become more and more accessible. Communication has always increased. And so to me, it's not like, oh, suddenly computers brought this great ill upon the world. It's just a dramatic acceleration. And I think with what you have with COVID right now, again, it hasn't really changed the world in terms of how digitization operates. It's just hyper accelerated it. You and me have been doing Zoom calls for a long time, but suddenly because of COVID, the whole world is doing Zoom calls, right? I think that's the difference. Maybe as people, as humans, we really struggle with noticing long-term changes, right? We also really struggle with understanding how exponential changes work. So maybe that's why it feels like this time is different. And every time it feels like this time is different, even though I would argue that actually it's just this continual ongoing rate of change that maybe hasn't even changed all that much when you zoom out, right? It's a very smooth curve. But more pertinently, the question is, okay, well, like it or not, technology and digitization will always bring problems. Everything in life has pros and it's got cons, no doubt. And I think that's been discussed to death. And I guess what we thought would be interesting to talk about today is what actually are the benefits. Obviously, there are a lot of benefits for business, for technology, but what are the benefits to people very individually, to their health, to their well-being, to the meaning of their lives. And I actually think that there are a lot of very powerful benefits to digitization that will shape our lives for the better as humans, not just as business-making capitalism machines.
So this conversation, for example, and the wonderful, incredible people from all over the world listening as we share, and we'll be answering their questions as we go. Now, is that an example of how we're able to impact and create change in the space of well-being? Would you define that as an opportunity, or that's still technology?
Absolutely. And I think what you've been doing with this webinar series is pretty amazing, right? You've been able to give people all over the world access to a whole series of experts like never before, right? Before it was you just couldn't operate at that scale. And never mind even, doing things like this on a webinar, but just on a very personal level. I've been a part of so many Zoom birthday party calls recently, right? And hey, it's always nice to be there in person, but the truth is, for a lot of people, it's not possible. And like it or not, you end up losing touch with people, including your own immediate family members, right? How many of us have immediate family that live in a different place that we talk to once every few weeks, right? And I think that's a little sad, really. And I think the one thing that COVID has shown, at least for me very personally, is that because suddenly the world has become completely flat, I can talk to anyone I want to with this hour. Who in the world do I want to talk to? And I have had much greater and much more frequent contact with actually my family that I did before this period. Talk to them at least every week, if not multiple times a week. And I talk to a lot of old friends from all over the world, including some that I see on the Zoom call. That honestly, they're the kind of things where you say, look, when I'm next in town, let's catch up. We'll have a meal. And that's nice. But, it's these small little glimpses of time in a way that you can't really share your lives with people. And I think that, but like it or not, this is just part of the world going forward. We will live in a fully digital and interconnected world. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because it will force us to relook at our lives and say, if I can talk to anyone at any time, who do I want to talk to, right? Who means the most to me and matters the most to me? And those are the people that I want to connect with. And I think that will happen not just in many dimensions of life, in the work that we do, right? Even Team Fusang, my company, we're largely based in 3 locations, but we suddenly have people effectively working remote all across Asia, and more, the job you do will no longer be defined by the geography in which you live, right? You can say, hey, I can do any job anywhere off my laptop. I could live anywhere, I could go anywhere, I could be with whomever, and I could do this job. And I think that flatness, so to speak, will really force people to evaluate what matters most to them, right? And the very character of how they live their lives.
And also, like you said, right, waiting till I come in town, or waiting when we get together, or waiting when the time works for us, right? So a lot of the work we've been doing with families was all pertinent on the time where everybody was in London, or the time when everybody was in Dubai, or the time when everybody was in Geneva, whatever the city was. And now they're open to, let's just do this 2 half days or 3 half days on a Zoom call and do the workshop remotely, because we don't know when that's going to happen, right? Yes. Because everybody has different restrictions, and even training, right? A lot of the training, a lot of people were hesitant to do a lot of the coaching, or a lot of the we have a lot of assessments that we do, and now it's not even there's no resistance, there's no question, right? So even there, the impact that we're able to do remotely is getting bigger and bigger. And what's happening now, I just had 2 calls. I had a bunch of calls yesterday and today to bring in another 10, 15 different practitioners into, to consider in the core team, and they're all over the place. Yep. And it was never that easily possible, right? Yes. In 2 days, I have a Rolodex of 15, all the way from Australia to LA, to London, to Shanghai, Beijing, and it's incredible. So, let's talk about maybe the impact on children, right? So when my kids were growing up, and a lot of parents were very, very upset about Minecraft, and then I spent some time with people who train other kids in you know, to program. And they said, look, I mean, what I realized is just Lego on crack, right? And it's accelerated Lego. And the advantage is if they learn how to program and become the best at it, it's all zeros and ones. So you're actually learning programming, which is amazing. So, you know, we brought in, you know, one of the top guys in Hong Kong to train the boys to program so they become excellent at Minecraft. Now, you were just mentioning a different game.
Yes, Roblox, which I know a lot of my colleagues, friends, kids play, which very explicitly lets you basically build your own games that other people will then go and play. And in a very real sense, create worlds for other people to inhabit. And as I said, like it or not, this is the world in which we operate. You know, I heard Larry Page from Google say a while ago, when someone was asking him, how long is it going to be before Google builds androids, robots? And he's like, what are you talking about? I spend every day staring to this thing. If you want to learn something, what do? You go to Google. You want to remember something, you look, you know, you go to your calendar. We are androids, right? We are attached to this as an outboard brain already. Like it or not, we inhabit a digital world, right? We interact like this. We spend our lives emailing. And so this is just the fabric, I guess, of the world in which we live. And I think that kids might as well get used to it. And I was at a different webinar recently, actually, where, like, among other things, the guy was making the point about saying, hey, you know, if your kid wants to play basketball, right, you know, even if you have no desire to play basketball as a parent, you feel like, hey, I should play basketball with them to spend time with my kids because that's the sport they do, right? Why is it any different from Minecraft? Right? If you're a good parent and that's just where your kid spends time as a recreational activity, how come you're not saying, oh, as a good parent, I better learn to play Minecraft, right? But it's just, again, to me, it's you know, things always shift, but it always shifts like this constantly, right? And there was a period in America where people thought playing basketball was only for poor people, right? No, it was not the kind of activity that a parent did with their kid. So everything shifts. You know, and I'm sure that my generation, there's going to be some other future thing. And I don't know, my kids will be inhabiting a VR world and I'm going to be like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to play Minecraft with them. How come they don't want to play Minecraft with me? Right. So everything always changes.
But what yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, but what I think is to that point of connectedness and spending time with your family is, you know, obviously in COVID, a lot of kids are spending a lot more time at home and spouses, right? But the point I made earlier about, you know, when you said you go into town and you meet up with a friend and you say, oh, next time in town, we'll have a meal together. I don't think people understand how dramatically that impacts the time you spend with people. So for example, if you have family that you do not live in the same country with, right? So let's say you have parents and you don't live in the same place and you see your parents, I don't know what, a week a year, 2 weeks a year, right? And however many days out of the year it is when you visit them or they visit you. And you look at the average age of your parents and you look at average life expectancy and you take whatever it is, 10 days a year times those years. And you realize, number one, it's a lot less days than you think. And number two, if you want to also share, I'll share a graphic with you after this webinar by a brilliant website called Wait But Why, which has just fascinating little funny treatises on life. And one of the articles he writes about, in very graphical form, shows different things, like let's say your parents, right? And says, okay, if you are 18 and you grew up with your parents, how many days will you spend with them, right? Basically 350 days, let's call it, or almost the whole year, times 18 equals to this. And then between when you leave home, let's say, and you see your parents 10 days a year for the rest of your life, it's like this small box. And you realize that, you know, if you lived at home before you were 18 and you left home after you're 18, you've already spent 90% of the days you will ever spend with your parents. That's a very small. And
so
that's true.
By the time you go to university, that's already 90%.
Right? 360, whatever it is, let's say 350 days a year, right? Spend the whole year with them, more or less, right? To, let's say, you know, 10 days to 2 weeks a year. Well, do the math, right? In one year, it's like 30 years worth of seeing them in 1 year. And you realize, oh, whoops, actually, yeah, I spent 90% of the time I'm going to spend with them. And he has a lot of graphics like that when he says, hey, again, right? If you are on average age, like let's say you're, 30, right? And you no longer live at home and your parents are X age, and here are the number of Christmases that you can expect to spend with them. And he has it in very graphic form, and somehow putting it on a single sheet just really makes you pause and be like, oh shit, I've only got whatever it is, right? 20 more Christmases. I've only got, this amount of time. And I bring that up just to say that we imagine when we say, I'll see you next time I'm in town, it doesn't feel, you don't feel it. You're like, yeah, I'll see you one day, right? And I don't think we realize the impact of what that really means when you actually do the math, right? You work out the number of days in the rest of your, if you see a friend once a quarter, right, for a meal, four times a year, right? How many times for the rest of your life are you likely to see him? It's a very sobering thought, And you're like, oh, wow, this is one of 150 times that I'm going to see you. I think it hopefully will make people think a little differently, but also I'm hoping will make people say, hey, maybe it's not so bad doing a Zoom call, and catching up with people more regularly than waiting until we're in the same place to see them. And to me, that's one of the most real and dramatic ways that people's lives actually can be vastly improved in a very personal health and well-being sense from digitization, right? If, like all technology, you can cut through the noise and ignore the cons that inevitably come with it.
So do you think that the next step, maybe in a few years or not even that long, we'll be wearing VRs and everybody participating in a Zoom call will be wearing a VR set and we'll be in the same room or in the same nature or somewhere like that? Because I mean, I always propose that to send to all the families we care for so that when we're sitting and having a conversation, we're in the same environment. Do you think that's just around the corner?
Very possibly, but even without that, that's basically how we live already, isn't it? All of us on this call right now, what percentage of your day do you spend on a Zoom call, right? We spend our lives staring at screens, and at some points, I mean, I don't just look at you now, Feisal, as like a bunch of pixels on my screen. I'm imagining you, right? I'm interacting with you in a very real sense. It's how else can you describe that but virtual reality, right? Everyone listening to this call right now. So like it or not, like I said, with our phones, with our screens, we already live in a virtual reality. We all have that experience of getting so lost in your phone that the world just vanishes, right? Including, unfortunately, a lot of people do it when they're crossing the road, right? Going away, so of course we already live in a virtual reality is my point. And I guess what's interesting then, perhaps as place to bring this conversation is, so what, right? What can we do about it to hopefully shape things for the positive and to maximize the positive benefits of digitization and technology and mitigate some of the negatives?
Now, I mean, let's move to education, right? So Gino, who did a webinar together, is already given VR sets to all his students, and 1 week they will be on campus and 1 week they will be doing the same education from home. Now, how do you see that as a positive? I mean, the human connection, as we know, campuses, as you've seen, right? You go before Thanksgiving, some are coming after Thanksgiving, things are kind of shuffled around. How is that going to improve our well-being in that sense of connectivity, as you mentioned?
Yes. I mean, on one hand, I guess that the danger of that kind of hyperconnectivity is that, as I think a lot of people are experiencing right now during COVID, a lot of the boundaries that used to exist are blurred, right? So I think a lot of people underestimate, if you work at home right now, a lot of people underestimate how much structure going to work gave you a day. Right? All that we complained about traffic and whatever, it was a ritual, right? You get dressed in the morning, you go out of the house, you go out, you come back, you see your kids, and hey, that's the way human society has been for a while now. And suddenly that's blurred, right? And I think that what that means is that the individual needs to do a lot more figuring out in terms of who exactly are you, right? What is your identity? When these lines start blurring, the upside is you get to decide.
Yeah.
Work where you want, you can do what you want, you can talk to whom you want, but that means that you need to pick. In the past, the world kind of picked for you. Your friends were the people who were around you. Statistically, right, people on average get married to other people that live within, it's expanded over time, but it used to be like a 2-mile radius only a few decades ago. And now I think it's something like a 30 miles. It's the average distance, basically in the same city, right? People who live in the same city as you, statistically, you're most likely to get married to someone from the same city. Maybe not on this call. I guess a lot of people here, I would, probably a bit more worldly. But hey, that's the way it is. And suddenly it's like, maybe that doesn't have to be the case, right? Maybe I can kind of start from a blank sheet. And to some people that is empowering. And to some people, I think that's terrifying.
Yeah, because the city, the area, the culture, the community was safe, right? Quote unquote. But in reality,
it's like, hey, let's say you work in, let's say you're a software engineer and you live in Hong Kong. It's like, okay, well, you go and get a job in software engineering in Hong Kong, right? Yeah. And suddenly it's like, oh, actually, no, maybe you can get a job in software engineering anywhere for any company. Just that expansion of horizon, I think, is both empowering and also I'm sure it's petrifying. Even for me, right? I spend a good chunk of my day trying to sit down and say, how do I prioritize things, right? I can talk to anyone I want to talk to. Who should I talk to, right? What should I do?
Also, you're not wasting as much time. Remember, there were a lot of meetings that you were having just because you needed to and it was convenient. Now, you're actually a lot more mindful or a lot more selective or a lot more purposeful. Is that correct or not really?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For starters, I've noticed that meetings have got much shorter. Right.
And why is that? Why is that happening?
I think it's, well, at least in a work context, right? I feel like, hey, before people have to travel and you want to make them feel like you didn't travel all that way for a 15-minute meeting. Right? Whereas now it's like, hey, look, we discuss what we need to discuss and then let's go off and do other things. Spend more time with our families, right? Don't need to just sit here and talk shop. And like I said, I think that people generally will need to do a lot of thinking about self-determination, what that means to them. And look, like, again, to be clear, as I said, there's nothing new about this. This is not something we've magically popped into because of COVID. This world has we've been trending like this for a long, long time. Already, it's been for many years that almost any piece of information that you want to access is there online for free. You want to learn any skill, you can go to YouTube and find dozens of introductory videos that will get you off the ground, right? I mean, so for a long time, the world has been like this. It's just a bit accelerated, and I think it's a bit more salient. It's been thrust in front of our faces where, hey, there's no more pretending. Right? You're sitting at home now, you've got free time, you can learn any skill, you can talk to anyone, you can do anything. What do you want to do? I think that's what people find the most jarring in this period. But
too much choice. There's a lot of choice, and there's no excuses anymore, right? There's no more barriers.
The truth is, I think that, one of my very core beliefs is that it really is up to you in many cases to author your own destiny, that the choices you make can shape your life. And I think that's actually terrifying for a lot of people. A lot of people don't really want to believe that. They want to believe that, no, my life is the subject of my biography and of my environment, right? As opposed to it's your decisions, not your conditions that shape your destiny, as Tony Robbins likes to say it. And, the metaphor that I sometimes use with people is, I'm a video gamer at heart. And when you play video games, in a lot of them, you have what they call NPCs, non-player characters. So these are pre-programmed AI. They just walk around, they do their pre-programmed job, right? They're designed to pretend to be like, people you can interact with, but we all know that they're not, that they've got a fixed pattern and they just follow that pattern and that routine and they go through it day after day, right? And to be honest, I think that's how a lot of people live, whether they realize it consciously or not. It's like, hey, you are following certain patterns and certain assumptions. Patterns like, if I live in a country, that means I have to work in this country, right? Or that I have to have a relationship with someone in this country, or whatever it is. And to continue the metaphor, the example I like to tell people is, in these same video games, if you are the player, you can do whatever you want. You get to move around, you get to decide your destiny. But if you don't make conscious choices, if you don't touch the controllers, what happens? You just sit there, right? It doesn't move. And so you can't have it both ways. You can either decide that you just want to get swept along with the waves of life, or you can decide to pick up the controls and you can decide to do something about it, but you can't have both. And I think the problem is a lot of people have suddenly realized, oh, actually, I do have a great deal of choice in my life, and I do have a great deal of agency and control, and oh, I don't actually know what I want to do with it.
So coming from that, so we talk about being and doing, right? So how is digitalization helping the alignment of my core being and the doing? You're talking about products and products we use and products we invest in, in that space. So to me, that's, that's really alignment of values. Yes. Can you touch on that?
Exactly. And in a sense, I guess it's an expansion of what I was just talking about, which is, a lot of people, like the products that you buy, the restaurants you go to, a lot of these things, whether you realize it or not, you are subject to certain patterns, right? You walk a certain way, you eat at a certain place because it happens to be nearby, or it's on your way home from work, or what have you. And again, this is not a new trend, but as digitization has made the world of commerce flatter, where suddenly if I want to, buy a shirt, I don't have to do it from my corner store anymore. I can go online and buy a shirt from anyone, anywhere. And that flattening of competition, in a sense, has also, I guess, forced people to make much more conscious consumption decisions and say, hey, right, I can buy from anyone in the world. Who do I want to buy from? In COVID, all of a sudden, at least in Hong Kong, it's become, hey, I can order out on Deliveroo from any restaurant. Where do I want to eat? Right? I don't have to fall into these geographically based patterns anymore. And my belief, and what I guess I'm trying to do in my company at Fusang, is to introduce what and I guess the World Economic Forum now likes to call stakeholder capitalism, which is to say that, I think a lot of people in today's world feel a looming sense of disconnect. A lot of people show up for work at a company and they don't feel engaged. They don't feel connected to their company. They don't feel like they're a part of the company, and they don't feel like the company is on their side or looking out for their best interests. And I think a lot of people feel like that also in the communities in which they live and the countries in which they live. A lot of people no longer feel like they have a stake in society, like society is there for them and vice versa. And it becomes this like us versus them discussion. And, we're both, we live at least part of the time in Hong Kong. And I feel that a lot here these days, where, there are two different camps in Hong Kong right now, and neither feels engaged. And neither feels like society is there to serve them and like they have a stake. And I find that a little sad and also, I guess, a bit perplexing, as I said, in today's digital world, where you have the potential for far more engagement than you could have ever dreamed of. Why is it that people feel so disengaged in today's world? And I think part of the reason is that we have forgotten about alignment, right? So for example, to give you the example of the company, a lot of people show up at work and work for a company, but they in many ways don't feel like they are part of a company, right? Companies, under traditional capitalistic theory, look out for their shareholders. I'm there to profit maximize for my shareholders. You are my employees. You're just a cog in the machine. And that's why we call it human resources, right? You're another, as an economist would say, you're a factor of production. You go in the machine and out comes my product to make money for my shareholders. No surprise, people don't quite feel engaged. Likewise, for communities and for countries, people no longer feel like their voice has an impact or that what they say makes a difference. And what I guess and a lot of other people, including the big theme of the World Economic Forum this year, was trying to move to a model of stakeholder capitalism, which is to say, in a very pragmatic, no bullshit sense, the world and companies actually will be better off if all of your stakeholders, the people who work for the company, your customers, your suppliers, all of your partners are engaged and have a sense of alignment, right? Not just in a touchy-feely, we all want to be happy sense, but in a very real, like, hey, in today's 21st century knowledge economy, where, as I said, more and more of it's going to be remote and more people are going to have a choice to work for any company anywhere. They're not going to work at a place in which they feel like they are a factor of production. They're going to work for a company, I think, where they feel like they are part of it, where they are engaged. That's why for many, many decades now, startups in Silicon Valley have said it's a good idea to give equity to employees because, hey, what better way to align interests and to incentivize them? You want your employees to think like a shareholder? Why don't you make them a shareholder, right? You want your employees to act in the best interest of shareholders? Hey, why don't you make them a shareholder? And I think that we can and should expand that concept, right, out to say, okay, well, not just employees, a company lives and dies by all of its stakeholders. Right? So if a company doesn't have customers that like it and want to pay it money, you have no business, right? Game over, no matter how engaged your employees are. So maybe just like how we think we should give employees equity, maybe we should be thinking about giving our customers equity. It's a radical concept. Maybe we should think about how do we align very directly our interests and values and our shareholder interests with our partners, with our suppliers, with our entire ecosystem around us. Because companies are no more than these fictional entities, right? Companies are not things, they're not tangible objects. They are these constructs that we all collectively agree to believe in. If the whole of Team Fusang tomorrow decides to stop believing in Fusang and not show up for work, we don't have a company anymore. If all of our customers decide for whatever reason they don't like us anymore, we don't have a company anymore. That's it, right? It's gone. There's nothing material in a sense. And so to me, we should be thinking, all companies should be thinking long and hard about, hey, how do I align interests with my stakeholders? And can I start to turn some of my stakeholders into shareholders? And obviously here at Fusang, we're trying to do so with digital technology is one way that we think we can help digitize securities, for example, and allow companies to distribute equity to people they never could before. But even independent of that, as I said, just as a concept, I think at multiple levels, you know, in your companies, in your communities, in your countries, it's worth sitting and thinking about, hey, like, do I have a sense of alignment? And if not, why? And if not, if I'm in charge of this enterprise, how do I build it? Right? How do I build that sense of engagement? Because otherwise, in today's digital world, people can and will move. They'll move companies, they'll move countries, they'll move everything, right? As the world becomes flatter.
So this is the conversation we were having last time, right? Where you have people who use Apple products, and you said you own almost all of them, but you don't own Apple shares. And the same thing for example, a Tesla, right? That you drive it, but you don't own it, and you own it, but you don't, you know, you own the shares, but you don't own the car, right? So that's, you know, and so how can companies move in that direction to get that alignment?
That's exactly what I ask at a lot of conferences I speak at. When I say, hey, raise your hand if, actually, I don't know if you can raise hands on this call on Zoom, but you know, I tell people, what percentage of your net worth is invested in companies that you interact with on a daily basis? Is it more than 50%? Right? Like it or not, companies run our lives, right? We eat at companies, we wear their clothes, we work in their buildings, our entire lives run by companies. We live in capitalist societies. And so in terms of your own investment portfolio, what percentage of your net worth is invested in a company that runs your life in some way? What percentage of your net worth is invested in a company that you work for? I think is an interesting question, number one. Just generally, right? The places I eat, I shop, I live, you know, all of it. What percentage of my net worth is invested? And for a lot of people, when I go to these conferences, it's like, oh, very little. My net worth is invested somewhere over there, a company that I have no contact with. And I find that, again, fascinating, right? Because, again, to use the example that you gave, I am an Apple fanboy. I own one of everything. And yet I don't own a single Apple share because I think that there are other places for me to invest my money, right? Investing in Apple is a financial decision quite separate from me being an Apple consumer. And, you know, right now it's almost, you know, Apple, the company, has two separate teams. They have an investor relations team talking to the Apple shareholders, and they have a marketing team to talk to me, the Apple customer, and it's two completely different groups of people. And I think it's fascinating to think about what if they could start to merge these groups of people? What if someone like Apple could give me non-financial benefits to being a shareholder? You know, Apple told me, hey, Henry, buy 100,000 Apple shares. Maybe not 100,000, the share price has gone up a lot, but buy X number of shares. We will give you early access to products, to iPhones. I would do it tomorrow without blinking. And more importantly, I would do it without looking at the bottom line, right? I would say, you know what, I'll buy it just because I want to be I want that benefit and I want to be a part of Apple and a shareholder. To their credit, I think Apple is the most valuable company in the world because they have been exceptional at creating that sense of loyalty, in a sense, that sense of engagement without needing to turn their stakeholders into shareholders. And I know this because to me, the definition of a great brand or a company that has built that engagement is when people make identity statements about it. So I don't say, I own an iPhone. I say, I am an Apple customer. I am an iPhone user. And to me, anytime you have the word I am in front of a statement, that's an identity, right? So, and I think it's very powerful to think about, hey, if you're a company, you know, like how do people describe themselves, right? Is it an identity or is it just a transaction? I use my bank because I don't have a choice and they've got ATMs near me. Or is it, no, I am an iPhone user? Because if I'm an iPhone user, when the new iPhone comes out, what do? I buy it. There's no discussion, right? It makes sense, right? Versus me shopping around, comparing prices, going for the cheapest option. So I think, as I said, in a very pragmatic sense, it's just great business for companies to build that sense of loyalty and engagement. And I think one way of supercharging it is by being able to take your stakeholders and turn them into shareholders. So something that Fusang is doing is using blockchain technology, we can basically create digital versions of traditional assets. I don't want to get too much into the technology because I don't actually think that's the important part. But for example, we take paper shares, and whether people realize it or not, most company shares are either in paper or PDF form, which to me is still paper, right? Nothing's changed really, just an image file. And we take those paper shares and we turn them into digital native shares, blockchain-based shares. Very simple process, but that one shift alone, I think, opens up a whole world of possibility in terms of redefining what it means to be a shareholder. In the same way that e-commerce wasn't just mail order catalogs put on a website. It redefined the relationship between company and consumer in a way that before, if I was selling, I don't know, shirts, I'd have to go to my local Lane Crawfords of the world and beg them, please carry my products, right? You, the intermediary, please help me sell my products to the end clients. And they had all the power. And suddenly with e-commerce, that got completely disintermediated, where suddenly I, the company, can directly sell to my customers anywhere in the world. And in fact, that's the default model. Right? It's almost surprising if a company tells you, no, I don't sell things online. I go to department stores and try and place my product. And you're like, what are you doing? Right? And that's the same is true for social media, right? Like for all of its ills, social media has allowed people and companies to communicate directly with their end consumers. I'm willing to bet most of the people who signed into this webinar saw this webinar's existence through a digital channel. You didn't read about it in some magazine that you picked up on the weekend, right? And once upon a time, again, that was the intermediation. It was, please, Glossy Magazine, carry my ad so people will hear about me, right? Now it's like, no, I post it on LinkedIn and I go direct to my end client. And I think the same canon should be true of shares, of securities as well. Right? And right now, it is exactly the same intermediation you had in e-commerce, right? Just like now I need to, before I would need to go to Lane Crawford and say, please carry my product and distribute to the end clients. If I want to fundraise, I go to an investment bank and say, please carry my product and distribute to the end clients. Same thing, right? It's consignment shipping. That's what underwriting is. I will buy your shares for cheap. I underwrite it. I sell it to the end clients. It's the Lane Crawford model all over again. And I think it's fascinating to think about what if we can disintermediate that and allow companies to go and place shares directly to their consumers and have that direct relationship, which to me is the other half of the relationship as a consumer, right? Every company has a balance sheet with two halves, right? There's the profit and loss side, and there's the, I need to serve my customers, they pay me money, I make revenue. And then there's the, what does my capital structure look like? Who do I raise money from? Who are my shareholders, etc. There are two halves to having a company. And right now, only one half has been digitized, and the other half is almost entirely manual and paper-based, from the paper-based shares at the bottom to the in-person knocking on doors fundraising process. And I do think that digitization can and should change that. But leaving aside the technology, as I said, what I hope people would take away as just a thought is to say, how will this, or how could this change my life in the same way as how social media has made whole new business models possible, right? It's not just, oh, it's a little cheaper and better and quicker. What can I do uniquely that I couldn't do before? Maybe not even for a company, but how can I start to rethink communities and value networks, right? And how we fund them and how we incentivize them and all the rest of that.
All right, now it's going to be interesting because I charged my computer and it's an Apple MacBook and it's at 10% and I'm in the middle of a dining room. So I'm going to ask you a question and then figure out a way to put myself on charge. And the question I have for you is, how is digitization changing your life and maybe, the life of others in terms of nutrition and fitness?
Yes. Well, I said, for one, it certainly changed my life radically in terms of access to information. But also, I think it's really changed my life in terms of just the benefits of how I can try and mitigate, in many cases, the negatives of technology. So, for example, one of the things that we always hear doctors complaining about in terms of digitization is blue light, right? We all stare at our phones at night. Right before going to bed, we're scrolling through Instagram, we're getting a huge amount of blue light, and that's interrupting our melatonin production and making it hard for us to go to bed, which is, I guess, a downside of technology, clearly. But we can use the same technology to mitigate those downsides. So I guess I'm fortunate enough that I've installed these Phillips Hue bulbs throughout my house. And with the cool technology that Apple makes, and to be fair, they're very cool as a company, and Apple HomeKit, I've wired them up so that every night at 10 o'clock, my lights go red, pure red, and don't produce any more blue light, both helping me go to bed and also as a clear sign that maybe I should stop playing with my phone and start the process of going to bed. I also use an Oura ring, for example. It's a little ring that I quite like that helps me track my sleep at night. And look, this is all just data, like all technology, as I said, I think it's just a tool. I don't think that in and of itself, it's good or bad. It's just more data that we can use. And the real question is, what do we do with that data? So I wear my Oura ring to sleep every night. And what does that mean, right? Do I actually use it to try and figure out what makes me sleep better at night or not? Do I actually go and for example, I unambiguously with my data know that if I drink coffee too late in the afternoon, past 2 p.m., it definitely interrupts my REM sleep, like it or not. And those are the kind of things that I think are empowering with technology and data, where if nothing else, it has given us more awareness and the ability to choose again, I suppose. So like it or not, if to me, I was talking with one of my coworkers at lunch today, and I was saying, look, like you need to understand the impact of your actions, the consequences of your actions. And it doesn't really, you can decide whatever you want to decide. If you want to drink that can of Coke for lunch, go right ahead, but don't bullshit yourself, right? If you're going to drink that can of Coke, recognize that maybe it's going to make you a little sleepy after lunch. And as long as you're keenly aware of that and you recognize the consequences, I think people should be allowed to do whatever they want. I think that what really pains me to see is when I see people who don't understand the consequences of their actions, right? Who maybe really believe they're making a healthy life choice by drinking that can of Coke. And that I think is a little sad. And that's why I think access to information is so powerful, to say, look, this information is in front of you, like it or not, right? What you choose to do, how you choose to act on it, and the choices you make will shape your life. But it's up to you to decide how you want to live. The tools are, technology is just a tool for you to use as you please.
And so, sorry about that. I had to disappear for 2 minutes. So in terms of, let's say on the DNA epigenetics and genomics side, do you feel that, how is that also impacting all of us in terms of the space? I know I'm in the space, but I want to hear it from somebody who loves the technology side and digitization side.
Yes. Again, I did a gene test many years ago, and honestly, most of the data was stuff I already knew. For example, it told me, hey, by the way, buddy, you're Asian. 99% of Asians are lactose intolerant. And I'm like, yeah, I knew that, right? We all believe we're in the magic 1%, that is fine, but really we're not. And, lots of other things like that really I already knew, but obviously the data helped make unambiguous. Right? We just put it front and center to say, hey, by the way, right, you probably don't do so well on these sort of things, or this is how, you should be adjusting your life. And again, I think it's just interesting in terms of raw data, right? And the question is, what do we do about it?
So it reaffirmed what you already knew, but did it help you, it also helped you reaffirm the choices you're making?
Or in many cases, yeah, exactly. In many cases, the choices I was not making, right? Where maybe I was bullshitting myself just a little bit. And this was unambiguous to be like, and when I saw this, I'm like, yeah, I knew that. I knew I don't do well on lactose, right? Yes. All you Asians out there, something to think about, right? Again, statistically, the majority of us don't do so well on it, but we all believe that we're the magic exception. So in that sense, I think it really helped. But look,
also absorption, right? Supplements, a lot of people eating supplements. I remember I was taking a supplement. It was really, really gross. And it was funny because I finally got my results back and it showed me that my absorption for that specific supplement was terrible. So I was actually really happy that I could stop having it, right? But again, a lot of us are having, whether it's supplements or all kinds of things, and our absorption is terrible. And at the end of the day, we're just, it's has not much value, right? So I think the digitization is helping us get the feedback loop that we didn't have before. Are you seeing that as well?
No, I completely agree. And maybe to link back to something I was talking about earlier is that, hey, digitization and technology are just tools. The question is how you use them. Yeah. So for example, speaking about genetics, something that I'm pretty sure you believe in as well is epigenetics, gene expression, right? Exactly. I mean, just because you have potentiality, the way in which you live, the choices you make, the environment in which you exist, in a very real sense, changes the way your genes express themselves and really shape literally the physical character of how you live. And to go back to my video game analogy, it's like, hey, it all comes down to the choices that you make, right? Potential is there, and the technology and the tools are interesting and useful, but it all comes down to the choices that you make, and that is what will shape your life.
And for us, we're seeing it, the height of our children, right? The height of our children my son is 6 foot something, and it's like, okay, what just happened? And of course, now the joke is it's the air in the mountains of Switzerland, right? And then others obviously who are negative are saying, oh, it's all the stuff that the chicken are being injected with, and that's why the bones are growing. But like you said, the epigenetic side, right? And it's funny because it's the same thing, right? We're all born with a certain capacity. It's what you do with your childhood and what you do with the experiences, right? And the choices you make. I mean, it's still the same, right? It's not any different. But now we have a science that kind of puts the stamp on it and says, this is it. Do what you want with it.
Exactly. And maybe one other thing to highlight that I was also just talking to someone about today, and maybe the biggest thing that to really think about with increasing digitization in a health and well-being context is that, for a long time, philosophers, scientists, people like Descartes believed in what they called mind-body dualism. You had the mind, you had the body, and there were these two separate entities.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of recent science has shown that that's just false, that humans are embodied creatures, that there cannot by definition be separation between mind and body. And to give a very real example, for example, a lot of people think about, oh, you have like a rational thought and you have an emotional response, and they're two separate things. And again, science has shown that it is not possible to have a rational thought not intermediated by emotion. So all thought is colored by emotion, like it or not. But it does work the other way around. You can have an emotional reaction without a conscious thought. So, if you ever touch your hand on a hot stove and you jerk it away, that reaction happens in your peripheral nervous system. It doesn't get intermediated in your prefrontal cortex. That's why it's so fast. And that's why you can react before you even know what you're reacting to, right? You're like, what did I just do that? Oh, I was about to touch a stove, right? So it does work the other way around. You can have embodied emotional and physiological reactions without cognitive intermediation. It doesn't work the other way around. And if I was to highlight anything that I think people should think about as we have this increasing world of digitization that should make them pause and consider with their own health and well-being is, don't get fooled into thinking that because we live in a purely Zoom environment and we do spend a lot of time in these virtual environments, that somehow we have achieved that lifting of the consciousness out of the body, right? What some philosophers used to call the ghost in the machine, right? There is you, the ghost, the observer, quite separate from the body. And unfortunately, that's just not true. You know, your focus, your physiology, how you live very much affects your mind and your cognition. And I think that is something that is very important for all of us to keep in mind as we live increasingly digitized worlds and also increasingly stay-at-home worlds, right? The world as a whole is probably moving less than it ever has in history, right? Until the average, look at world average, like steps per day, for example, it's probably at an all-time historical low. And that is something I think for us to take quite seriously, to say, hey, there's no reason why digitization and health and well-being can't coexist, but like anything, you need to be conscious about it. And we need to use the tools that we have to be able to, for example, track the impact of the activity that you're doing and how that affects you and your well-being and your health. But that if you don't pay it any attention, it's not like the fantasy of just sit in your chair and spend the whole life in a VR world, I don't think will work out the way that people imagine if they ignore the body and the embodied part of cognition.
So nature, right? You're talking about even going out in nature, right? I mean, obviously, when it's locked down, that's not an option, but otherwise, that whole space and opportunity to do so, yes. Right? And how all that is changing. But again, with children, right? I mean, they still want to, I mean, are you seeing less and less children wanting to go out and play and spending more time at home? Or do you think that there is a balance and that that will continue?
Yes, so I do think more and more kids are going out less to play. And as I said, I think that is a trend that has been continuing ever since the dawn of time, right? Ever since we moved into homes and out of the wilderness. But, you know, I don't, honestly, of all the demographics I worry about children the least, because I think that they're the ones who have the most engaged and active lives right now, right? Kids, many of them have adopted seamlessly to this new digital post-COVID world. They still talk to their friends, they still play on Roblox, their minds are engaged, they are active, they're creative. So, you know, maybe unfortunately not as physically fit as they could be in previous eras, but hey, of all the populations that are engaged and what philosophers would call have a sense of eudaimonia, like well-being, I think that they are doing okay. Right? I think that where I would worry is people who hoping, and we've talked about this in our last call, people who are hoping that the world will go back to the way it used to be. We're saying, this is just a short-term thing. If I just wait for a little while, everything will go back to normal. And it's like when the internet came along and you were just waiting for all of the internet stuff to go away so you can go back to the way it used to be. That's just not going to happen, right? Like it or not, we've been unavoidably thrust into this world of digitization. And I think a lot of people are kidding themselves if they think that what we're doing now, will not become the default. Fusang as a company, I'm not sure if we will ever go back to holding in-person events ever again, right? We used to hold massive things, and why, right? We can touch so many more people and engage so many more people than we ever could before online. And so I think, like I said, like it or not, we need to accept that this is part of our new reality and just start asking the question of, okay, well, you know, this is a tool like anything. There are pros and there are cons. How do I maximize the benefits and mitigate the downsides? And what we're talking about last call is how do I be resilient, right? How do I maximize the benefits and really, you know, grab the opportunity and go from here?
So we have about 5 more minutes. I mean, we have time. It's just that, are there any topics that we didn't touch on that you want to touch upon before we start? I mean, anybody has questions, please share. Is there any other topic that you want to touch on in terms of, I mean, we looked at the physical, we've looked a little bit on the mental and emotional and the relational side. We talked about children. You're concerned about more the elderly, I assume, right? Especially from a connectivity perspective and movement perspective. Obviously, a lot of people, I'm in Dubai right now and I'm having meals with different people and most of them are fitter than ever.
Yes.
Like they have now realized the impact of travel on their bodies, which they completely, when I used to meet them before, completely pushed back on, right? They said, no, You know, I sleep on the plane and I get there and everything's fine. And now they're realizing what a complete different, you know, choice it is. Again, that flexibility you talked about, timing. They're now working out in the mornings rather than in the afternoons, right, or late afternoons, and that's changed their game completely, right? The energy, etc. The quality of napping has improved, right? The quality of sleep has improved. So are you seeing the same thing? Because you said that choice. Now, of course, these are people who are making better choices. I'm sure there's the other end as well.
But I completely agree, and I think that's exactly the point. I think it's completely false to say, whoops, there's COVID, therefore everyone is at home and cannot be active and is unhealthy, right? I mean, it's like, hey, you can do. I recently started doing burpees on my living room floor, right? Hey, you know, you know, stop with the excuses, right? You can be just as active as you ever were before. How active were you before anyway,
Anyways,
right?
yes.
When you could go out and roam in the forest and the wilderness, you did that how often, right? So I think if anything, it's, as you say, it's highlighted for a lot of people the importance of health and the fleetingness of it. And I think that a lot of people actually are starting to make healthier life choices. I think my families, for example, my parents are getting in shape at long last. And that's exercising every day. You know, and even me, I've been thinking a lot more about my own personal health.
But do you see them using digitization to measure, or you're not seeing that? Are they just more healthy, or are you seeing that feedback loop as well?
Partly. My dad wears his Apple Watch to go swimming in the pool every morning.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess the point is, again, you know, being able to measure exercise, not exactly a new technology.
Yes.
Right?
No, but I'm talking about the usage, right? It's not only about whether it's new or old. The question is, am I using it, and is it being used more, and am I paying more attention?
Right? I think it is, and that's the point, right? As I said, these are all just long-term trends. It's just that, number one, a lot of these trends have been accelerated, and number two, it's kind of in your face, right? So you cannot run away from the fact that there is full digitization these days, because it's just so obvious, and so there's no more pretending in that sense. And no, I maybe long term, that's one of the best benefits of COVID. Not just in terms of digitization, but in a lot of aspects of health and well-being, right? Where people will say, okay, like I can't pretend anymore. Yes, I do need to pay attention to my health. Like it's become, as psychologists would say, very salient. And people really notice and think about these things these days. And I actually think that long term, we'll look back on COVID as a period that was net good for a lot of people, because it made them stop and think about exactly this. You know, I think a lot of people I know are getting much healthier. Certainly the whole world suddenly has much better hand hygiene, which might lead to long run, a lot less communicable diseases.
But I mean, the thing is, if they do get healthier, then immunity improves and overall health will improve, right? So let's see in the next, once this COVID period goes, whether people are actually getting less flus, getting less infections, seeing the GP less as a result of the fact that they made choices that were very different and healthier than before. And as you mentioned last time, a lot of people are cooking, right?
Exactly.
That never did before.
And I'm honestly willing to bet that when we look back at the data for this whole period, that the number of other communicable diseases, like seasonal influenza, is going to plummet. Just because of things like social distancing and everyone staying at home. And I think it'll be fascinating to see a lot of the statistics around that. Here in Hong Kong, I have never seen the weather so clear. Actually, until the last few days, I think, you know, you can tell that things are returning to normal because suddenly the skies have been getting a little cloudier. But for months, it was crystal clear blue skies every single day, right? Pollution was a distant memory. I remember thinking, wow, this is what it was like 200 years ago when people first came here. And already it's starting to creep back in these last few days.
Yeah.
Unambiguously, yep, it is the humans causing all that pollution. And again, it'll be fascinating to see, hey, maybe what the incidence of lung cancer rates in Hong Kong is the last few months, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the two main ones are nasal and gastrointestinal. Those are the two, they're actually the highest in the world. So it'll be interesting to see. But then again, they've been ordering Deliveroo, so I don't think the gastrointestinal is going to change as much. And it's also stress related. And with the unemployment rates going up and things like that, I don't know how well that will do. But the nasal one for sure should be impacted by the environment, as you mentioned. So Henry, we're almost out of time. So in closing remarks, what are some of the things you'd like to remind us or ask us to consider, or just to reaffirm from what you shared?
I would say just that digitization and technology broadly is a tool. It is a tool that has been trending like this for a very long time, and it's nothing new. And like any tool, depends on how you use it. There is good and there is bad, and it's up to the choices that you make that will shape your life. And certainly at Fusang, my company, that's what we tell people. I'm like, hey, we build technology. It's new, it's better, we hope, but that's not what you should focus on. What you should focus on is the outcome. What can you do as a result of that technology? What can that technology let you do that you couldn't do before, right? Yeah. And in our company, we hope that that will help turn a lot of stakeholders into shareholders and really help usher in this era of stakeholder capitalism, where hopefully we start to feel a lot more aligned with the companies and communities in which we work for. But more broadly, I would encourage people just to think about that for their own lives, right? Hey, instead of letting my patterns, my habitual patterns run my life, I think COVID is a great chance that those patterns have been swept away. And so we can all pause and reflect and say, what were the patterns that were running my life, conscious or unconscious? And now that I have a blank slate, a blank sheet, how do I want to build my life going forward?
All right. Thank you very much, Henry. The hour has passed by very quickly, as always. Thank you for taking the time, and I wish you bon appetit, since I know you haven't had your dinner yet. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. Next week, we have Ramya, who is a second-generation family business member. She's the editor-in-chief of Tarawat magazine and the CEO of Orbis, which is a content marketing company. And the week after, we have Jay, who's the CIO of of Dinesh Hinduja Family Office. That's going to talk about how well-being impacts the C-suite. And sorry, Ramya is going to be speaking about entitlement in the family business. So that should be quite a juicy conversation to have. So thank you, Henry. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week. All right. Goodbye.